They are icons of comedy and an American institution. Three characters that are part of the very fabric of popular culture.
I ought to know. One of them was my father.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Just how do you grapple with the fact that the apple never falls far from the tree? Well, it landed with a clunk, slap, plop. When it came to me, my source of frustration was my dad's occupation. He's a stooge. Oh no, egad! Hey Mo! Hey Mo! Hey Mo! Hey Mo! Hey Dad! I always hope to be an ordinary Joe, a face in the crowd, John Doe. But just my luck, I'm born son of Mo. I never yuck for my father, and it wouldn't be Mo if I had my brothers. And oh, by the way, take a look at his brothers. Hey Mo, hey Mo, hey Mo, hey Mo, hey Dad. But while I was blinking, something got me to thinking how my dad was always for real. It hit me with a bonk, boom, crash, is what it took to get me to feel. Well, now I ain't hiding and I'm swelling with pride, along for the ride and glad. So here's the Three Stooges story in all his knucklehead glory. It ain't just a passing fad. Hey Mo, hey Larry, hey Uncle Curly, Uncle Shemp, hey Joe and Curly Joe. Hey Mo, hey Mo, hey Dad. Kerplop.
Thank you, gentlemen. Come, I'll introduce you.
In 1946, Curly, that seemingly irreplaceable third stooge, was disabled by a devastating stroke.
Dilapidated.
Now, if the Stooges were going to continue, the irreplaceable would have to be replaced. And it fell to my father, Mo Howard, to determine the future. Columbia Pictures needed new Stooge comedies to meet public demand. And Mo, for reasons both personal and professional,
You know, I was thinking... Quiet.
couldn't just say no more. Up until 1932, the Stooge names had been Mo, Larry, and Shemp. Then the older Howard, tired of the hard-hearted Ted Healy, had exited the scene to be replaced by little brother Babe. Now, in the face of the bitter fate that had befallen Curly, Dad once more turned to a family member to save the act.
I'm Halliday.
I'm Taraday. I'm Groundhog Day.
It was deja vu all over again.
Mo called Shemp and he said, "Shemp, you have to come back because we need you." And he was doing very well on his own, but because he loved his brother Mo, he says to Mo, "I will come back into the act. I will come back."
Hello.
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 Is this the Miracle Detective Agency?
Yes. The harmony's bad. We didn't have time to rehearse.
After Curly was gone out of the act, it made perfect sense to bring Shemp in.
Shemp had been with the act before.
You look great, kid. You're a cinch. Go to it.
So actually it was a big benefit to Moe and Larry to get somebody of the caliber of Shemp to come in and fill the role of the third person.
Yes, it was the logical choice, the right choice, the classic no-brainer. So, of course, it almost didn't happen. Columbia executives didn't like the idea at first, on the grounds that Dad and my Uncle Shemp just looked too much alike, thereby wrecking the comic contrast. You can decide for yourselves if the movie men had a point.
Oh, there I am. And as pretty as a picture. Yeah, but Nate, get gone.
In the end, it didn't matter. Dollars ultimately determined the issue, as they usually do. Shemp was indeed familiar with the routines.
I got it. What? A terrific headache. Oh!
And he had plenty of performing experience with his former partners.
Strategy. Who's asking you?
Production could therefore continue without a pause, saving time and money. So for maybe the 1,000,000th time in Hollywood history, the song of the cash register was #1 on the hit parade.
What's the total? $411, but there's a sale today.
You get 10% off.
That makes it $42.50.
And speaking of things financial, both Dad and Uncle Shemp immediately decided to donate a portion of their weekly salaries to Curly. Larry insisted upon making an equal contribution, regularly sending his share along with those of the Howards. This act of generosity touched my father deeply. Larry wasn't family, but he always acted as if he were. Now, in the 14 years since Shemp had hung up his Stooges hat, he had not been resting on his considerable laurels. He had, in fact, been a very busy fella.
He had a very funny solo career. He was great in the Bank Dick with W.C. Fields. He was great with Abbott and Costello.
But Abbott and Costello,
John Wayne,
Dietrich,
John Wayne,
W.C. Fields.
Most memorably, W.C. Fields' The Bank Dick. I think that is his most memorable screen appearance as the bartender. He never seemed to lack for work. He did a lot of work for the Vitaphone Corporation, which was Warner Brothers' short subject outfit, which worked in Brooklyn, and was very active in the 1930s, and so he was there a lot. He worked even with Fatty Arbuckle there, and a lot of other talented comedians, many of them from the stage or vaudeville, because those are the people working in New York on the stage who could go to Brooklyn and make these quick, short subjects. And he was even Nobby Walsh in a series of Joe Palooka, two reel comedies, which was a very popular comic at the time, comic strip, and he was a very popular character, so that helped build him up even more. He made shorts for a variety of studios as a solo comedian, and then ultimately found his niche as a kind of supporting player and character actor comedian in Hollywood, and was in dozens and dozens of shorts and feature films, lots of feature films. He worked with a lot of people, quite a bit at Universal Pictures, where they did a lot of sort of bread and butter comedy features, and he was one of their go-to guys.
Upon his return to the Stooge ranks, Shemp drew on his wide experience and his well-honed skills as a comedian to establish his own personal style. A style that was worthy of the world-class standards of the Columbia shorts.
He sure could act scared. He'd be totally horrified when something would happen. And I think he did that better than anyone else.
Yes, there will be strange happenings.
You know, that just opening up something and going,
Something's got me.
yeah. Whoa! Whoa!
Edward Burns, for one, was extremely impressed with his work, calling him a trooper and a delight as a colleague. And the director also paid my uncle this compliment. Burns said that Shemp was a remarkably versatile comic actor who could do almost anything, while Curly for all his genuine genius, could only have been Curly of the Three Stooges. Still, Shemp was following a legend, and whatever Shemp was, there was always something he was not.
Shemp's a very funny guy who I'm afraid has suffered in recent years and decades because he isn't Curly. There's nothing wrong with Shemp, except for, in many fans' eyes, he just can't take Curly's place. And of course, no one could take Curly's place. Nobody, because Curly was one of a kind. But Shemp was one of a kind, too. He was his own man. He was a very talented and experienced comedian. You just wouldn't want to have to be the guy to step into Curly's shoes.
But those were the shoes that Shemp had been fitted for, and he wore them with tremendous energy, enthusiasm, and talent. If the fans could no longer have their beloved Curly, then they were at least lucky enough to enjoy the brilliance of his rubber-faced replacement.
Oh, a wise guy. So you meant it, eh? Oh, cut out this nonsense.
You only have to watch the older Howard at his finest to realize that no, he wasn't Curly, but he was Shemp. And that was good enough to create a comic legacy that belonged to him alone. Not as a stand-in for Curly, but as a star.
What's the matter? I'm dancing from a trombone pot.
Shemp episodes were great. They were very popular, again, because Shemp was an established great comedian in his own right and brought a whole new perspective to the group in the things that he did that were so different from Curly. And those early Shemp episodes are classics as well.
Mo, where's your hat?
In classic two-reelers like Malice in the Palace.
There you are, sir. You look very pretty, and the spaghetti's as good as new.
Sing a Song of Sixpence, and Brideless Groom, Uncle Shemp delivered with punch.
How dare you pretend to be my cousin Basil?
And was often the recipient of just that.
Don't you dare strike me! Taking advantage of a poor, weak, helpless woman!
My uncle delivered the comedy goods with a personal style that did the Stooges proud. And if poor Shemp's head hurt, well, at least he was sharing the pain with the people in the audience whose sides were aching from laughing. Yes, in front of the camera, Shemp was a wild and crazy guy, loony and lovable in equal measures.
Homogenized.
And you know something? What you saw on screen was, to a very great degree, what you got off it. Because like his little brothers, Mo and Babe, my Uncle Shemp was one of a kind. He had, as someone once pointed out, the face of a felon. He seemed on film to be just like the guy next door, assuming, that is, you live next door to an insane asylum. But he was, in reality, a sweet and sensitive soul who loved his partners and the people he called his own.
When I first met Mo, it was, "Hi, how are you? Nice to see you," whatever. When I first met Shemp, it was hi. It's like I'd known him for 30 years and we just caught up again.
My favorite was actually Shemp. He was wonderful. My mother was very friendly with Babe, and I would always go over and visit, and he would always have a shiny dollar, silver dollar for me. And he was just very loving and just a sweetheart of a man.
Shemp was a wonderful family man. He would be so happy when the family was all together. He felt very close to Mo. Their relationship was very, very good. They had a little trouble with Curly, because Curly was a little bit of the
renegade.
The renegade, that's right. That was a good word for it. And they used to worry about Curly. But of course, Mo was always the business manager, and Shemp was a little bit more the easier type of a person.
Easygoing is not, of course, the term you would use to describe Shemp's character in the Columbia comedies. he always seemed just a twitch away from coming apart at the seams, especially if the subject was women.
We're detectives. Mr. Goodrich sent for us.
Oh, I'm his niece.
The niece is nice. Hold on. We're here on business. I mean business? Oh, wait a minute. Why, you... Hold it. You know what this means. You can't give it a minute.
He had all the skills that it took to go all the way. I think he was a real instinctive actor, very natural. He was probably just a funny man machine in real life. He was probably just funny and would probably do antics to the kids and stuff. They must have loved it.
My Uncle Shemp had a very stable, very supportive marriage with the other member of the family, whom everybody called Babe. Shemp was indeed a devoted family man. He and Babe were kindred spirits, sharing a love of friends and fun, of parties and the ponies, and of doting on their son, Mort.
Well, Shemp was a wonderful father. Both Babe and Shemp were very, very proud of Mort, my husband. They did try to spoil him a lot, but he was very independent. He was a self-made man.
Mort, like his father, left a deep and abiding impression on everyone he met during his tragically short life. An impression that, again like his dad's, was singularly positive and happy. And I count myself among the people who were lucky enough to call him friend. And just as Shemp had been devoted to the little boy who called him Pa, he later lavished the same affection on the little girl who called him Grandpa.
He was very kind to me. We had a, like I said, very loving relationship. Every time I would cry, I was told that my grandfather would come over and make sure that there was, I was okay.
Yes, you can tell a lot about a man from the way he treats the people close to him. And sometimes you can tell even more from the way he treats the people he doesn't even know.
Mort was Babe and Shemp's only child. He did not tell me who his parents were, so it was a big surprise. On our first date, I went out to the car, and there I saw Babe and Shemp. That was my first meeting with them. And all of these fans were running over to Shemp and asking for his autograph. And I was amazed at how nice he was to everybody. I said, doesn't that bother you? And here you're out and you want to enjoy the evening and you have all these people coming up and asking for autographs. And he said, the minute they don't come up and ask for autographs, then I'm going to be in big trouble. He says, I love the fans and I love doing it. I love signing autographs. And I thought, he is really a very, very nice person. And as time went on, and I got to know them better, I realized what a wonderful personality he truly was.
He would take me every Sunday to what was called the Kiddie Park in, Southern California here. And we would pull up in the cab and people would run over to the cab and being 3 years old, I couldn't understand who these people were or what was going on or who my grandfather really was. And they would ask for autographs.
Now, I said earlier that Shemp the comic was at once lovable and loony, and the same was true about Shemp the man, especially the loony part, because you see, my uncle was a bit of a nut. A very nice nut, to be sure, but a nut nonetheless.
I wasn't sure about Shemp because he disturbed me. He disturbed me because I wasn't sure what he was doing. He would show up and I'd think, oh, something's wrong. Something's wrong. He's about to do something. Because you knew it wasn't going to go as smoothly. Like with Larry, you kind of go, oh, it'll be all right. With Curly, it was like, oh. But when Shemp showed up, it was like, you know how, like when you see Pigpen walking and you see the dust up around him? Shemp had like a tornado around him when I looked at him. Because there was always something getting ready to happen, and he was so jittery. It was like, dude, you are gonna explode. Calm down.
Wait a minute, Mo. I feel kind of edgy myself. I ought to take something for my nerves. Like what? A trip home? Come on, get going.
He had more fears and phobias than a textbook on psychology, and his many neuroses might have inspired a man like Sigmund Freud to hang a quarantine sign on the door.
A lot of things frightened him. During the war, my mother-in-law said, Shemp, don't worry. I'm going to be an air raid warden. I'll come back and report everything to you, and you'll be perfectly okay.
For example, in Hold That Lion, Shemp, you know, I mean, to me it was comical because the lion was a sickly-looking thing. They had a whip, give him a little whiplash to make him open his mouth or something, you know. Shemp, unbelievably, almost turned pale and almost shook, you know, when the time came for a scene where the lion is supposed to be in the background or something. And he just absolutely, no sir, no way will he be that close to the lion. And the funny thing is, we did that scene with a good big plate glass between him and the lion. And then later on, they were looking for the lion. Here comes the trainer looking for him, and there's the lion sleeping behind Shemp.
Sometimes I think it would be quicker to list the things that didn't scare my uncle rather than to count the things that did. He was terrified of cars, swearing off driving and sweating it out as a passenger. Water made him go green at the gills, and once during a fishing trip, he insisted that he was getting seasick on the dock. And he was so frightened of doctors that he refused to have a mole on his ankle removed, telling people that he needed it to keep his socks up.
It seems to me that he was frightened to death of life or something, or by things in life that might have kept him out of places where he could have really served his own best purpose, you know, fulfilled his objectives as a performer.
In spite of being a little crazy, or maybe because of it, my Uncle Shemp managed to mix the sublime and the ridiculous into a comedy concoction of rare quality. It was our good fortune that he was both an exceptional entertainer and a great guy.
I'm about to do you a big favor. Will you marry me? Oh.
And it's not an exaggeration to say that he came to the rescue when my dad and Larry needed him most, completing the trio.
Shut up! Well, give me back my front teeth.
And providing the perfect foil for the Three Stooges films of the late 40s.
I'll take a milkshake. With sour milk.
But as the decade turned, dark clouds were starting to gather. The winds of change were beginning to blow, and soon a brutal storm would batter the world of the Stooges. I, however, wasn't really aware of all the problems to come. I was just a kid facing challenges of my own. And one of those challenges was being the son of a very famous father.
When I was about 15 years of age, I was a fairly popular kid. And one of the reasons was my dad taught me how to play the ukulele. So one afternoon at school, I'm sitting around the lunch area and I'm playing the ukulele. Last night I ordered an oyster stew, alone, tee-hee, alone, as one little oyster came to view. Alone, tee-hee, alone. He raised his head and he said to me, I've been in many of stew, said he, but don't tell the cook that you saw me. Alone, tee-hee, alone. So I'm playing my little ukulele, and there's a few kids around me listening to me. Suddenly, over my right shoulder, I see a bunch of kids all gathered together. Maybe it's a fist fight. I don't know what it is. But there's 25 or 30 of them, and they're kind of moving towards me. Closer and closer, until it got to be about 20, 25 feet from me. Then suddenly the middle opens up like the Red Sea. And out from the center walks Dad. He walks up to me kind of nonchalantly and says, Paul, Mother thinks that somebody tried to break in the house the other night, so she had the locks changed. Here's an extra key. We're going to be home late tonight. I wanted you to have it. We chatted a couple of seconds, and he turned around and disappeared. And now, after all those years of keeping it a secret of who Dad was, my cover was blown.
For most Americans, the 1950s were the good times, a welcome relief from the challenges and conflicts of the previous 20 years. The post-war economy was booming. Big chrome-encrusted cars were barreling down the highway, and rock and roll was beginning to blast from jukeboxes and transistor radios. For the Stooges, however, the 50s were anything but fun. My dad was worried about a lot of things, about Curly's illness, about the act, about money. He had worked so hard to get where he was, and now it all seemed so fragile, so fleeting. And then he had me to worry about, a teenager eager to test his wings.
Even though I grew up with Mo, I lived a pretty normal life, and I had some pretty normal friends. But every now and then, we got into a little bit of trouble. Like one night, we decided we wanted to go out on Cahuenga Boulevard and put beer cans on the street and listen to the cars go pop, pop, pop over them. Well, that night, we went out there and did that and hid in the bushes. But what we didn't know was that someone was watching, and that someone called the police. 5 minutes later, suddenly a car roars around the corner, the police jump out and chase us. I'm running like crazy, but the policeman is running faster. He grabs me, we walk together to my house, just about 4 or 5 doors. We get to the front door and I'm praying that my mother will answer the door, but my prayers were not answered. The door opens, there's my father. I can remember it as if it was yesterday. The door opens, and there's my dad. He takes one look at me and says, "I've been busting my ass to make a career for you and the family for 30 years, and in 10 minutes, you try to ruin it for me." And then he began to cry, and that was the first time I'd ever seen him in tears.
And there would be more tears to come, because the sad and spectacular story of his little brother Babe was about to enter its final act. Ever since his crushing stroke in 1946, Curly had been living in a gray world whose gloom was periodically lifted by the hope of recovery. In fact, by 1947, he was well enough to make a cameo appearance with a full head of hair in a Stooge two-reeler, Hold That Lion.
I'll bet that's him. Take it off.
It was the first time the three Howard brothers were seen together on film. Unfortunately, it was also the last.
What is that, a cocker spaniel? No, I think it's just a spaniel. That's not him.
Well, we tried to build Curly's morale up by putting him not in one picture, but in 2. But it didn't work out. His speech was very thick, and it was just more damaging to me than it was to anyone else.
It's very poignant to think that they brought Curly back 1 or 2 times to the studio and had him make very small cameo-type appearances in the shorts in the late 40s. Whether they did this as a bit of old lang syne or to see if he was up to performing again, I don't know. It certainly adds a almost melancholy postscript to his life and career, to know that he was there, but he wasn't there.
No, Curly wasn't really there in the bright lights of fame or in the dark shadows of his illness. It was truly limbo. But solace can sometimes come from the most unexpected places. After the horrible experience with a money-grubbing Marion, it seemed unlikely that Curly would ever fall in love again. But broken hearts, even Stooge ones, can still work in mysterious ways. The same year that he appeared in Hold That Lion, my uncle finally found the soulmate he had been searching for all his life. Her name was Valerie Newman. She became a devoted companion who was everything the gold-digging Marion was not. On July 31st, 1947, About a month after my sister Joni's wedding, Curly and Valerie walked down the aisle. And a year later, they welcomed into the world a baby daughter, Janie. Perhaps for the first time in his life, Uncle Curly was in a relationship that made him truly happy. But happiness was not enough, because the damage had been done. His physical deterioration was accelerating, and to that now was added a creeping dementia, wild mood swings, and irrational behavior that almost seemed psychotic. And sickly stricken Curly, deteriorating by the day, was soon spending more and more time in hospitals. I vividly recall visiting my uncle in one of these facilities, St. Joseph's Hospital in Burbank. I remember proudly wearing my high school swim team Letterman sweater, thinking it might cheer Curly up and give us something to talk about. Entering his room, I was shocked to see my uncle, lying in bed as helpless as a fish in a boat. I wasn't surprised, however, to see Dad standing right by his side, tending to his every need, like the guardian angel he had always been to his little brother. After a moment, Curly's head turned in my direction. He muttered something to me in recognition, and tears ran down his cheeks. I was so overwhelmed by this heartbreaking scene that I completely forgot about my silly sweater and merely put my hand in his, saying, "It's good to see you, Uncle Curly."
You can't even imagine what it's like to know in the back of your head that you know that somebody was alive and vivacious and a happy person, and then the next thing you know, you see them as completely paralyzed from the neck down and drooling. I mean, that is the extreme that my memory takes me.
As much as no one wanted to admit the truth, it now seemed clear that the curtain was closing on a memorable and yet misspent life. That curtain came down on January 18th, 1952. The official cause of death was a massive cerebral hemorrhage. But I don't think it's melodramatic to say that my uncle was ultimately murdered by his own demons. Jerome, Babe, Curly Howard was all of 48 years old. I didn't go to the funeral. I know I should have, but I just couldn't bear it. Dad took Babe's loss very hard. He had been devastated by the deaths of Jenny, Saul, and Irving. But this was different. This was the little brother he had watched over like a father all his life. This was the man he had worked with on a daily basis for 15 years. And this was something that never should have happened the way it did. The death of Curly cast a pall over the Stooges that never really went away. The personal loss suffered by Moe, Larry, and Shemp, and in turn by family, friends, and fans, was enormous. And more trouble was on the horizon because professional woes were about to be added to private pain. Pretty much throughout the first half of the 1950s, the Three Stooges remained the top box office draw among two reel short subjects. The public missed Curly, of course, but they had learned to love Shemp almost as much.
Sir, this is so sudden.
You muttonhead.
Larry!
The fan mail kept pouring in. Moe, Larry, and Shemp were still in demand for personal appearances, and it seemed as if the Stooges would go on forever.
Columbia had the largest short department of all the studios in town. And the Three Stooges were the top of the heap in terms of the shorts that they produced.
But success is like good weather. It tends not to last. Hollywood was changing, and not in Stooge-friendly ways. The motion picture industry had once been the upstart that killed vaudeville. Now, there was a new kid on the block, And families were becoming extremely fond of sitting in front of a large piece of furniture that featured a tiny glass screen. Yes, television had arrived. It was having a profound effect on moviegoing and on movie making. And it was scaring the heck out of every movie producer in town.
What is all this? What's happening?
If the motion picture was going to remain the king of the entertainment hill, it would have to find ways to lure viewers away from those damn TV sets. So the studios experimented with all manner of enticements to tempt the public. Widescreen, stereophonic sound, 3D. The more things change, the more things stay the same, right? And in 1953, Columbia decided to release 2 Stooge shorts, Spooks and Pardon My Backfire, and 3D of all things, in the hopes that it would revitalize the short comedy films that were feeling particularly keen competition from television.
I'll get you this time.
The reception, unfortunately, was less than rapturous, and it was soon after this failed foray into three-dimensional stoogery that the popularity of the team began to show an undeniable decline. Could it be that the upwardly mobile suburban audiences of the post-war period no longer related to the working-class urban comedy that had been so appealing during the Depression? Whatever the reason, Columbia reacted by cutting the budgets, using more stock footage, and recycling scripts into a series of remakes. This in turn led to infighting and to a series of crippling defections in the Stooges' ranks as important writers, directors, and producers left in search of greener pastures. Moe, Larry, and Shemp now faced an uncertain future, and an unkind fate decreed that uncertainty would give way to tragedy, because that future would not include one of them.
Now, this minute.
On a late November day in 1955, my Uncle Shemp had just completed a particularly tough stretch of shooting. To celebrate, he went to the racetrack and then took in a boxing card with a couple of his cronies. The actor who had once played Joe Palooka's cornerman was genuinely fond of the fight game, and the fight game was genuinely fond of him. After all, he put on almost as good a show as the guys in the ring did.
Shemp loved going to the fights on Friday night at the Hollywood Legion Stadium. He had the habit of taking every punch and taking every blow. So he was the second star attraction.
There goes Shemp with the left jab. There goes Shemp with the right uppercut. There goes Shemp with the haymaker. There goes Shemp.
After each round, they would come and wipe him off and make sure that he was nice and dry. And he was hysterical. He was very funny. And that was one of his loves, were going to the fights.
After the fights were finished, Shemp and his pals piled into a car, headed for home. But that trip would end not in contentment, but in tragedy.
Don't tell me that there isn't a Lord above who watches people, because he watched out for Shemp. Because when time to go, if Shemp knew that he was passing away, it would have been terrible. And it didn't happen that way.
They were clowning around coming home from the fights, and he lit up a cigar. And he lit the cigar and then leaned forward. And they said, "Shemp, Shemp." They thought he was clowning around. And they were shaking him, and they realized there was something wrong. So they rushed him over to St. Joseph's Hospital, and he was pronounced dead of a cerebral hemorrhage.
Samuel Shemp Howard, the once and future Stooge, was just 60. Like his baby brother, he was gone much too soon, but Curly's passing was expected. Shemp's came suddenly and without warning. I'll always remember how we found out. We had just finished dinner and the phone rang. When Dad put down the receiver, his famous face of stone couldn't hide his anguish or his pain. All he said was, "Shemp's gone," and went into another room to be alone with his grief. But Mom wouldn't let that happen. She joined him to share the tragedy. I'll always think of my sweet, silly Uncle Shemp as the man who made people happy. Whether it was at a family gathering, or at a sporting event, or just sitting around watching TV, he was always a joy. The classic cliche of everybody's favorite uncle. He had the same childlike charm that made Curly so special, but without the dark, self-destructive streak that had disfigured his younger brother's life. In many ways, Shemp was a simple guy, as in simply terrific. This time, I went to the funeral. And one moment illustrated my uncle's life better than 1,000 eulogies. Old Vernon Dent, one of the most frequent and most welcome co-stars of the Columbia shorts, was suffering severely with diabetes and was completely blind. But he came to pay his respects anyway and had to be led up to the casket. There he stood with his unseeing eyes for what seemed like an eternity, gently feeling Shemp's hand and then his face. Fellow bit player Emil Sitka later said it was one of the most touching things he had ever witnessed. Deep emotions ran strong that day. During the service, in keeping with Jewish tradition, my father recited the Kaddish, the prayer for the dead. Dad's voice clearly betrayed the strain of sorrow, and in mid-chant, it broke. It took all his actors' training to control the tears and the terrible grief. It had been 40 years since my father had first shared a stage with Shemp, appearing as part of an absurdly awful vaudeville act. Now, on that grim afternoon in 1955, Dad was saying goodbye, not just to a beloved brother, but to a bygone era as well. Mo Howard, last of the performing Howard clan, now stood alone, with only the ever-loyal Larry still left by his side. Together, they would now be forced to confront advancing age and a shifting show business landscape with a shattered act and with heavy hearts. And the surviving Stooges were forced to confront one more thing. Curly was dead, the victim of his own lethal demons. Shemp was dead, the victim of damn lousy luck.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, she says. If I leave now, that proves I'm dead. Well, goodbye.
Now, after 35 years of sensational success in vaudeville, on Broadway, in feature films, and in comedy shorts, could it be that the Three Stooges were dead as well?
During the mid-1950s, it looked like the Three Stooges' career with Columbia Pictures was coming to an end. And our houses in the San Fernando Valley had to be sold. And it was really a low point. But this weather vane, kind of like our family coat of arms, represented a shift in the wind. A shift in the wind not only for our family life, but also for the Three Stooges' career.
Yes, that was the question. Was the seemingly indestructible act known as the Three Stooges now really part of history? Or could it rise again like a phoenix from the ashes of calamity?
Shemp dies, and my father is having to go through this heartbreaking situation again.
It was devastating enough for Mo to have to bury his younger brother, Jerome. But then after his older brother, Shemp, had come in and joined the group, he had to face that once again.
The twin blows of his two brothers' deaths, so close together, had drained the joy from all the silly slapstick and corny jokes, and my father, with Larry's support, seriously considered disbanding the act.
My mother was wonderful. I think she gave him the strength to go on. I've got to give her credit for that. because he was ready to give up.
Still, I know such an outcome would have wounded my dad, despite his profound grief. He loved being a performer, smelling the grease paint and hearing the applause, and his showbiz cronies were like a second family to him.
Hey, look, I found another 50.
Yeah, so you did. Why?
When all was said and done, personal feelings took a back seat to cold, hard cash. Columbia insisted that the Stooges continue to crank out comedies because the two-reelers were still too popular to just fade away. And so my dad and Larry soldiered on. Their initial idea was to perform as the Two Stooges, but for the studio that was one Stooge too few. As far as Columbia was concerned, 3 was the charm. What this meant in the short run was a ghoulish variation on a Stooge comedy from 1948. In that film, Heavenly Daze, Shemp dies, but is allowed to return to Earth to watch over Moe and Larry. Now, in 1956, life was about to imitate art.
They had to make what was called the Shempless Shemp shorts because they had to complete the contract.
The studio inserted footage of the dead Shemp into 4 shorts that were essentially remakes of earlier efforts. The studio cobbled together comedies combining new material featuring Dad and Larry, stock footage of my uncle, and for the long shots, Shemp lookalike Joe Palma, whose face was never seen.
Go on, you heard the guy.
Joe Palma played in many, many shorts. He was a wonderful supporting player, filled in for Shemp. Those had to be shot differently. Shemp always from the back.
There were no VCRs during those days, and so people really couldn't closely compare whether this is the real Shemp or not the real Shemp. You can see if you look hard enough, it wasn't Shemp.
Shemp, guard the door.
The Stooges and the studio had to somewhat get by with what they had. They had no Shemp. They didn't have a big budget. And so they were kind of piecing together what they could to get by at that particular point in time.
It was as bizarre as legendary bad filmmaker Ed Wood substituting a ringer for the dead Bela Lugosi in his magnum opus disaster piece, Plan 9 from Outer Space. A new Stooge was needed, and Dad, still in mourning for his brothers, had to make the choice.
This was uncharted territory for the boys because there was no immediate replacement. There wasn't an older brother or Shemp or anybody else to step into those shoes.
For more than 30 years, the Three Stooges had meant only one thing: the Howard brothers and their loyal, longtime buddy, Larry Fine. Now new blood was needed to save an age-old act. The winds of change were blowing through the lives of the Stooges. And if they were going to survive, then the Stooges would have to ride those winds into a new and unpredictable world.